So she said, just let you know, I've been to Sherry since. I'm like, okay. She got back to me and said not to worry. No, I'm like, why isn't Sandra wearing a mask to work then?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's something for you to say. You're not a danger, right? But, and they're just saying it's because he's from, like, these people are from Toronto. It's because they're from Toronto. And I'm like, I don't know. I think you could be just as dangerous as them.
Mm-hmm.
Once the summer was over, too, and you guys were away from Legacy and you went back to Toronto.
Yeah.
Just saying, the puppy, unless you kept him in Toronto, would have ended up with those furry ones in its mouth. You know what I mean? Like 7. Lucky number 7. 7 survived. No, I've got a little bit of everything. I've got 7 sunflowers. Mm-hmm. There's rhubarb. Mm. Oh, go look. What is it? It's the pea treony. The peony
So
tree.
you've just finished listening to the audio recording of my mom, Karen. Some of those clips she knew she was being recorded and others she didn't, but I have her permission to use all of those clips, of course. So my mom is a 57-year-old woman born and raised in Owen Sound, Ontario. It's a small town about 2 hours north of Toronto. She did her undergrad at Brock University and began her career as a lab technologist in Toronto, where she worked for about 18 months before moving back to Owen Sound, where we currently live. Now, at the end of the audio recording you just listened to, my mom said pea treeny instead of peony tree. This is a really cool linguistic phenomenon called the Spoonerism, named after William A. Spooner. He was a long-serving Don at Oxford New College, and he's attributed with those phrases you see on the screen. What these phrases all have in common is that the onset syllable cluster of 2 of the words have been metastasized, or switched around, to create a nonsensical or a silly phrase. But what's more about Spoonerisms is that they also show us an insight into the lexicon and the process in which we parse sentences. Before I get into that, there is an argument that Spoonerisms are rooted in Freudianism. That is, it's our subconscious coming to the surface. I'm not so sure if I'm convinced, but I would love to know your thoughts on that. I'd like to turn now to Dr. Karen Humphrey and her 3-level model of the lexicon that she uses in her 2014 McMaster University lecture on slips of the tongue. So she shows us that we have no issue accessing forms to words in our heads from the conceptual to the lemma level, but it's once we start to plan sentences and we get a little ahead of ourselves that we run into phonological errors. So Spoonerisms also show us that the lexicon stores roots and affixes rather than all possible words. We can see this in the Spoonerism rules of word formation to words of rule formation. So you can see here the suffix s stays on the first word of the sentence rather than moving with the root rule. So Spoonerisms are an example of field linguistics, and what I mean by that is this phenomena can't be readily elicited in a lab experiment. You kind of just have to sit around and wait for it to happen. So I was actually really excited to be able to capture it in my mom's recordings. That's not to say, however, that you can't elicit speech errors in a lab experiment. You totally can, and I'd like for us to all try one now. So if you would join me in saying, or at the very least, mouth along with me, poke, 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 and the white of an egg is called a... So, awesome. If you said yolk, that just goes to show a slip of the tongue with a little lexical priming. The biggest takeaway from studying my mom's English was realizing how careful and how apt she was to correct herself when she recognized a speech error in herself. I can't help but think this has something to do with the semantic shift that her name is currently undergoing in the media. So, names and the connotations they carry with them, I think is a really important conversation to be having right now. Is it just to call someone a Karen? Here are the top news results for Karen this past week, and my family's thoughts on the name to get the ball rolling on this conversation.
And the meme, the reply was Justin Trudeau saying, Karen, would you like to speak to the managers?
I'm afraid to say anything about anything to anybody.
Oh, what a Karen.
Exactly! They'll be laughing their ass off at me. They'll be
actually a Karen.
They'll be laughing their ass off at me. They go, oh, what a Karen, right? What if her name's Karen? And she really is a Karen. And they'll be laughing at me, and it's like, how would you think if your name was Karen?
So from here, I invite you guys to look through the rest of my project. I run through some quotative be likes, Toronto pronunciation, grammaticalization, pre-roticized vowels, and of course, Spoonerisms, all salient features that I found in my mom's English. But I also encourage you to think about these Karenisms. Do we see this in any other name? Chad comes to mind. I look forward to your questions. Thanks.